Over the last few weeks, we've been talking about insight meditation and becoming aware of, on a deeper level, the emotional and physical experiences in our body, and with that deepened awareness, coming up with new ways, skillful ways, better ways, more helpful ways, healthy ways, natural ways of working with difficult emotions, with stress, anxiety, some of these kinds of things. But the key, of course, as we've talked about, the key is really the awareness thing. And kind of like I shared with the idea that, sometimes you'll become aware, even when you're not actively meditating, that, oh, I'm holding a lot of tension in my body. Or I seem to be noticing that I'm a little agitated or annoyed. There's sort of this, and you've probably had this kind of experience too after a little bit of this practice, where you just sort of catch it at different times. And it's not a blaming kind of a thing, or a, well, there's another thing that's wrong with me kind of a thing, but it's more of a, oh yeah, there's an objective awareness. There's some agitation present, or some maybe a little anger, hostility, or ill will, or whatever it is. So you become aware of it, and then once you're aware, well, then you can do something with it. So like tension in the body, if I'm real stressed out, I might check in with myself from time to time and realize, ooh, what's that all about? Shoulders are up, jaws are clenched, tightness in the body, don't really need it. I can let that go. I notice along with that I just feel a little more at ease. Checking in, just doing these kind of mini check-ins throughout the day. That can be helpful. But awareness is the key, because without the awareness, you don't notice. And if you don't notice, you can't do anything. So awareness is the key. And when we do our meditation practice, we talk about moving awareness through the body. And we start to learn through first-hand experience that is kind of a soothing, the awareness is not like an intrusive sort of, what's going on here and what's going on there, but it's more of a soothing flow. There is this awareness. The mind is the knowing faculty of the body. So the mind, in conjunction with the different senses that we have, there's knowing sensation. There's knowing the sensations in my scalp. There's knowing the sensations in my body. And within that knowing of sensation, kind of objectively looking at it, we start to notice the tension. So then mindfulness or awareness allows us to let go of that tension. Or sometimes we notice a sensation, as I said, that we would call, oh, this is pain, right? I feel pain in my shoulders or my neck or my back or knees or whatever it is. Maybe there's areas that we would call that. Oh, that's a sensation of pain. But then, with this objective awareness, we're trying not to really attach a whole lot of meaning to all these different sensations, other than there's a sensation to be known. And here I am with it. And there's this stability and this peacefulness of our own being that starts to become apparent. And you will notice that when you come across one of these sensations that you might normally say, this is pain, that there is kind of emotional baggage that goes along with pain. I don't like pain. Nobody likes pain. So there's a little bit of this aversion. There's a little bit of this, yeah, I'm releasing, but then there's this pain. And so we kind of treat that with just a little different type of approach. There is this emotional baggage, just for lack of a better term or a different term. So letting go of the ideas around physical pain can help us to release the tension around it and start to let go a little bit. So this can be helpful. It's that objective quality of awareness. So we know that oftentimes when we're in the non-objective state of mind, the opposite of objectivity, you know, there's kind of judgment. And the judging mind, we know that the judging mind is a lot of times the part of us that causes conflict internally, and then that kind of spills out into the rest of our lives and causes conflict externally. But a lot of times that judging mind doesn't feel so good either. You know, that's the part of us that sees people as we're going about our lives, and there's, you know, before we know it, there's kind of a judgment. Oh, this person, you know, is this way, or this person is that way. And some of it, there's just a little bit of, you know, kind of a hint of, you know, maybe not so niceness there, and we catch ourselves do that, and it's like, oh, that's a habit, and that doesn't feel so good. So there's no blaming in that, but then we recognize, well, hey, you know, it feels better when I don't do that. So can I start to let go of my judgments about myself and about other people and just move into this place where I feel a little freer and a little more able to just be without the conflict. So that's kind of in some ways, a little bit of a summary of what we've been talking about. And I wanted to get into what I just spoke about in a little more detail and give you some tools that can help it to be, help you to understand it real clearly, hopefully, and so then you can use it as a tool, kind of an effective tool for working with difficulty. So we'll get into that. And this one I'm calling Wisdom and Impermanence, just so I've got a reference for a title. But there's a Zen parable, and I want to read this to you. You may have even heard this one. Maybe I've told it before, but this is I enjoy this one. An old man accidentally fell into the river rapids, leading to a high and dangerous waterfall. Onlookers feared for his life. Miraculously, he came out alive and unharmed downstream at the bottom of the falls. People asked him how he managed to survive. I accommodated myself to the water, not the water to me. Without thinking, I allowed myself to be shaped by it. Plunging into the swirl, I came out with the swirl. This is how I survived. And I think of that as just sort of complete non-resistance. Here I am. So there's a difference between standing over the water and thinking, well, I'll just not care if I fall in or be careless, you know, but it's finding yourself, well, I'm in the water. So sometimes I talk about kind of letting go of attachment or accepting what's happening. It's accepting what you're in is really what it means. And so that doesn't mean you're condoning or liking necessarily the fact that you don't feel good or that you're worried or any of that. So acceptance doesn't mean approval, but acceptance does mean, oh, I understand. I'm looking at what's happening objectively. I see it. Because when we don't accept it, then that's where denial comes from, and that's where pushing away and rejection, and of course that doesn't help. Because if there is another thing that is true that's actually happening, well, then the best thing is to look at that and do what you need to do with it. So I love that parable about just, I accommodated myself to the water. He didn't have an expectation that the water would somehow accommodate itself to him, which is a lot of the times the way I know I have had a habit of going through life is, all right, people, you know, everything would be, I think it was Gore Vidal said something along the lines of, the whole world would be perfect if everyone would just do as I say, you know? And we kind of think that way. If everybody just thought like I thought, then everything would be fine. Well, you know, that's not going to happen. And thank goodness, it would be pretty boring if everybody did think like me. But people don't. And so recognizing that and not expecting the world to conform to me, but realizing that sometimes I'm going to have to kind of go with the flow of life. And that when I realize that this is the situation I'm in, and I'm able to be completely aware of it, then that puts me in a position to best work within the confines of that set of circumstances. So, in Pali there's a word, anicca is how it's pronounced, and that word means that everything is always changing. It's constantly in flux, and everything is impermanent. Now that's an interesting word and an interesting concept, because we can look at that, and depending on what our mindset is, that could be sort of unsettling. On the one hand, oh, things are impermanent, things are changing. Sometimes we don't like that. I like things to be kind of the same. I like things to be predictable. I don't like the idea of impermanence, especially when it comes to things like, my own physical life or the life of people that I love. So sometimes that can be a little off-putting. I don't like that, but nevertheless, impermanence, change, constant change, constant flux is a fact of life, and it's a law of the universe, certainly. And so to recognize that, we recognize, well, that change is the thing that allows babies to grow up, become wonderful people. It allows middle-aged, uptight people to become kind of gentler, kinder, older people. It allows buds to become flowers. It allows seeds to become buds. Change is life. Life is change. And so we look at that and face the honest truth of it. And so that's kind of a liberating thing to think about. But here's another way to think about that and think about our own human beingness, which is that a human being is kind of like a conduit through which everything in the universe flows. Okay? And think on one level, on a very sort of gross physical level, one thing that passes through this conduit is nutrients, food, right? We eat, and then it moves through the conduit and comes out the other end of the conduit. It flows through. So nutrients, food, water flows through the conduit of the human body, through the experience, and that's human life. Air and oxygen, that's another thing that flows through us, the breath constantly flowing in and out. So the breath flows through us. Blood flows through the body, constant change, constant flux. Impermanence, it's all moving. Consciousness itself. The things you're thinking about right now are not the things you were thinking about 30 minutes ago, and they're not the things you'll be thinking about in an hour. Consciousness is constantly changing depending on the inputs, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're making contact with. So consciousness, all your emotions, all that's changing. And of course, life itself is change. And to stop the flow of any of those is, by definition, ultimately to kind of stop the flow of life. And so to open up and kind of loosen up and accommodate ourselves to this flow, rather than expecting the flow to accommodate itself to us, we can be like that old man who goes through the waterfall and comes out the other end and just says, yeah, no problem. When there was a swirl, I became the swirl. And then when the swirl came up, I came up. And so he moved through with it, and he didn't have problems. And you think about life being like a flow and all of these experiences being like a flow. Yeah, if you were to stop any of those things on a short-term basis, there's a little bit of imbalance, right? If you didn't eat for a period of time, if you stop the flow through the conduit, well, then you start to get hungry, and then you get weak, and then, so at any point you stop that flow of nutrients or water, then there becomes a problem in that stream, in that conduit. Or if you were to hold your breath, soon there's going to be some conflict. There's going to be a problem because you're stopping the flow. Or again, another sort of, a gross but real example. If you stop the flow of the nutrients halfway through for a few days, well, that creates a little discomfort and imbalance. You know what I'm talking about? But, these are examples of, everything needs to move, right? Everything needs to move and flow, and it's this constant flow. Everything is anicca, and that's wonderful, because that's what life is. It makes it possible. So anything stopping on a short-term basis leads to imbalance, and then on a long-term basis, it leads to one form or another, or in one form or another, it leads to death. So then kind of coming back to the idea of our own physical pain when we experience it, or emotional pain, our instinctive reaction to those pains and difficulties is an instinctive pulling back, wanting to escape physical discomfort or emotional discomfort or any of those kinds of things. It's a pulling back, having aversion to it. Our reaction to emotional pain is the same. And sometimes, when we're afraid of something, we want to close ourselves off to it. But the trouble is, you aren't really closing yourself off to it, because it's already inside. By the time you become aware, I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid of this thing happening, or I have a real aversion to that thing, I don't want to deal with that, so the reaction is, I guess I'll go, I'm going to go shut the flow down. I'm going to shut the conduit. I'm not going to let it in. Well, it's in, because you're already having this reaction, right? This reaction of aversion is an indicator that it has already entered this conduit. And so sometimes our reflexive reaction is to go and kind of close ourselves off. Oh, I feel a lot of pain, so I want to, like emotional pain, so I don't want to get hurt again. So I think I'm just going to kind of withdraw, I've been in relationships that are difficult, and so I just, I don't want to get hurt by another person, so I'm going to just pull back a little bit. Pretty natural, but the feeling of that reaction means it's already in there. And so you close it off, and what you've done is locked it in. So it's kind of like stopping the flow of the nutrients, this far. Well, it's going to start to create an imbalance over time, and on a long enough timeline, it's going to cause a lot of harm. So you really can't close yourself off to these things, because once you've started to experience them, they're already in there. And so it's sort of the recognition that, hey, I'm in the water now. I fell in. I need to do something with this, because I'm already in it. I'm in it. So now, what do I do? Another example I thought is I was thinking of myself in sort of a caged area with a wild animal, vicious wild rabid animal on the outside, and I saw this animal, and I thought, danger, I need to avoid this. So I ran to the back door of the caged area, and I closed and locked that, and then I ran to the front door, and I closed and locked that, not realizing that the animal was inside with me, and I've just locked him in, So sometimes that's kind of what we're doing in an unintentional way. Yeah.
The word picture I thought of right away about this Zen parable was anytime I'm at the ocean, or even up on Lake Superior, they talk about the riptides.
Mm-hmm.
And what do they tell you to do with riptides is not fight them.
Yeah.
You're supposed to just flow with them.
Yeah.
Wherever they take you until they release you.
Yeah.
And that's what I was thinking with this picture.
Yeah. Yep. That is very, very accurate. Or I was thinking about if you're, we do a lot of kayaking, and if they say if you fall into water that's moving fast, if you fall into a fast-moving river, the tendency is a lot of times you want to turn over onto your belly and start swimming. You kind of point yourself to, that's where I'm going to go, and you start swimming. That's your reaction. Now, the force of the water is obviously, multitude of times stronger than you could possibly be, and so it's going to be carrying you. And so even to be aiming and then resetting your aim on different spots, you're going to be burning up a whole lot of energy. So what they say is flip over on your back, let your feet be in front of you, which is just kind of completely opposite of what you would do normally, and let it flow with you until you move to a place where the current is not as intense, because it will subside. You will get to a place where the river turns and you find yourself in a gentle pool, and then you can deal with it. But while you're going through it, what you want to do is not exhaust yourself or injure yourself in some way.
Protect your head with your feet first.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very much like that. And that's one of the things about Zen parables that's just kind of cool, is that there's always sort of this element of, nature, learning from nature, because we're part of it after all, yet we think we're not. So it's like you can learn everything you need to learn by just observing and realizing you're part of it. This is called the Kosala Sutta, and I'll read this to you. I think it's kind of interesting, but it's talking about this concept of skillful and unskillful, and then we'll talk about that a little bit. Abandon what is unskillful. It is possible to abandon what is unskillful. If it were not possible to abandon what is unskillful, I would not say to you, abandon what is unskillful. But because it is possible to abandon what is unskillful, I say to you, abandon what is unskillful. You kind of getting it? But that's not all. If this abandoning of what is unskillful were conducive to harm or pain, I would not say to you, abandon what is unskillful. Because this abandoning of what is unskillful is conducive to benefit and pleasure, I say to you, abandon what is unskillful. So just kind of like the idea of the riptide current or the current in the water, there's sort of this reaction to things that seems like it makes sense, and it's a little counterintuitive to do something a different way because of our reactive nature, but that's what we need to do, in fact. And so that's why this is kind of worded this way, almost in that same sense. Like if you were really trying to teach somebody, here's what you do in a riptide, you'd kind of say very calmly over and over, here's what you do, here's what you do, and it's okay, and this is why you do it. So then the second half of this this little sutta, and I bet you can kind of imagine what it says, develop what is skillful. It is possible to develop what is skillful. If it were not possible to develop what is skillful, I would not say to you, develop what is skillful. But because it is possible to develop what is skillful, I say to you, develop what is skillful. If this development of what is skillful were conducive to harm and pain, I would not say to you, develop what is skillful. But because this development of what is skillful is conducive to benefit and pleasure, I say to you, develop what is skillful. Okay, sounds good, but what on earth does that have to do with anything? The words for skillful and unskillful, or unskillful and skillful, is the order that I have them written here on page 3. Akusala and kusala. Unskillful and skillful. Sometimes we talk about things in terms of the reactive mind and the wisdom mind, kind of a common thing. That's what that's talking about. Skillful and unskillful. But the best way to kind of start working with this is to kind of drill it into your consciousness in a gentle, sort of loving, compassionate, but tough way. Sort of, listen, you need to do this. You need to abandon what is unskillful, and it will help. And you need to develop what is skillful, because it will help. And it will not hurt you, even though you might, think it's counterintuitive. One of the words we've used a lot is the word sati. SATI, that's the Pali word for awareness, or for mindfulness, we a lot of times say, same word, it means mindfulness. And what that means, we can say mindfulness, okay, yeah, pay attention, right? Yes, that's true. But really within that sati word, there is more. We'll observe, but we're going to observe within the framework of our own body and mind, you know? I mean, this is where we live. We have this body, and within this body is our mind, and so within this complex, or within this framework of the body and the mind. So why is that noteworthy? Well, first off, because this is where we live, it only makes sense to work within it. But what this is also telling us is that, let's say we observe something outside of us. Let's just say we see, maybe you could say a news story. Let's say a news story. That might be a good, sometimes we use those as examples. You see a news story and it's heartbreaking, right? And it also makes you angry. So you see this, and if you were going to start to practice mindfulness around that, there's sort of this tendency to focus on the object that made this happen, right? But what this practice is asking you to do in order to be mindful is you're going to, okay, that's what triggered this. But now you're going to move into the framework of the body and the mind to do the mindfulness part of it. So now it's, okay, but what is my, what's my relationship to this? There might be a news story here. But this news story broke my heart, or it made me sad, or it made me fearful or angry, or all of those things combined. And so now, if you want to work with that mindfully, you need to become aware of what your relationship is to that within the framework of your body and your mind. So that's just a slightly different, take on it. So yeah, we sort of get it, body and mind, but hey, that's where you have to work on the stuff that disturbs you, because it disturbs you within the framework of the body and the mind. So that's where you do it. Objectively is the second one. And objectively means impersonally to a degree. Not in a cold, disconnected kind of a way, but in a way where you're able to remain non-blaming and non-judgmental, because that enables you to see things clearly. I know that if I stub my toe on some object in the house and I go to this place where I'm thinking, who left that there? This hurts, I'm angry. It doesn't really put me in a place of mental or emotional clarity where I can pick the object up and move it, or realize I myself was the one that left it there, of course, or, I need to put a Band-Aid on my foot, or whatever it is. That reaction doesn't help. And so oftentimes we're trying to blame, or we're trying to judge, or we're trying to rationalize or justify something. And while there's a perfectly, good place for that in our lives, it doesn't help with regard to mindfulness, because it sort of obscures the point. What are we really trying to look at here? There's pain going on, there's emotion, there's fear, there's anger, whatever it is. So I really need to be aware of that on an objective level so that I can do something about it. The third one is attentively. Needs to be clear awareness. Clear awareness. Discriminating wisdom, it's sometimes called. But that means to see it on the surface level of consciousness. We talk about that a little bit, which is, you're right now, if you draw your attention to just feel your own feet, that's attentive awareness of your feet. Before that, you were aware of your feet. I mean, you could feel it, but it was only happening on an unconscious level. They were there, you knew it, you're having sensations in your feet, you're reacting and responding to those. There's a part of the mind that knows, but then when you actually go there, that's attentive awareness. So there's a big difference. Things happening unconsciously versus things happening, I'm paying attention. Now I'm paying attention. Changes everything. And then the fourth one is in the present moment. And in the present moment, that helps with the objectivity, and it helps with the other things as well, because it's not going to be helpful to work with how you felt yesterday, or how you might feel tomorrow, or how you wish you felt, or anything else. You really need to work with what's happening right now. The present moment, what's happening right now, what's true. How do I figure that out? By being objective, by paying attention, and by paying attention to what's happening within the framework of the body and the mind. So all of those are sort of aspects of this mindfulness that we talk about as the foundation of our practice. Sati, awareness. It's a bigger thing, which is sometimes why I like to go back to that Pali word, because it really means kind of a lot of cool, helpful, important stuff. When we don't have sati, that quality of mindful awareness with those 4 attributes, when we don't have that, when things happen, we don't pay much attention, and the result is we react to them with whatever the prevailing habit energy of the mind happens to be. And that's called a sankhara. So a good example of this might be if you've had the experience of being a little mad about something that just didn't go well. You know, you're just a little annoyed. And you're kind of in that state. I'm a little ticked off, you know. Spilled coffee all down my shirt. You know, could be something minor like that. Spilled coffee all down my shirt on the way into work, and I'm a little annoyed by that. And then you go into work, and let's say you spill coffee again. Well, you're already kind of in that mindset of, I'm annoyed anyway. When that second thing happens, your reaction will be much more intense because you're already there. It's kind of, that's the prevailing habit energy of the mind. Now that's kind of a simple example of it, but that happens all the time. I mean, if we're kind of, you know, if we leave off, well, when I think of this particular subject or this particular, you know, political thing or this particular issue or whatever it is, when I think of this, you know, I have unpleasant thoughts. I feel aversion, ill will, anger, you know, whatever it is. That's kind of the prevailing habit energy of the mind. That's sort of where you left off. And that doesn't just go away. When you go back to that, it picks up right where it left off. You know, picks up right where you left off. In addiction, they talk about how you can be clean and sober for quite some period of time. But if you start using the substance again, you will go right back to where you were when you left off, like, you know, almost immediately. You go right back, and it's the same kind of a thing. We have those habit energies, and whether it's addictive substances or just the way we sort of think about things around us, that habit energy is there. It's called a sankhara in the Pali, and it's a real thing. So the reaction, when we're not aware, when we don't have sati and we're not mindful, so we're just kind of going through life like we normally do, the reaction is going to come up based on whatever the prevailing habit energy of the mind is, and that will be an unskillful reaction. Unskillful simply because we weren't observing it mindfully and paying attention to it. So we're in the reaction before we even have a chance to do anything with it. That's why it's called unskillful. It could even be a pleasant experience with sort of a positive reaction. Something happens and you like it. Something happens and you enjoy it. But if it happens without the mindfulness, then it can quickly turn into something that we call craving or clinging or attachment, because you're not aware of it, and so you can say, oh, I want to feel like that all the time. I need to do what I need to do to make that happen all the time. And it would be neat if you could really feel great all the time because you took this pill or ate that thing or had this experience, but of course it doesn't happen. And deep down we know that. And so to become attached to it, cling, crave, those attachment types of tendencies of the mind, they're just going to lead to more, feeling uptight and upset. So it's likely to lead to the craving or the clinging. If we don't like something, there will likely be a reaction of anger or ill will, animosity, or some other type of aversion. And as a result, this will produce more negative experiences, more disliking, more reactions of anger, ill will, animosity, etc. In the Pali, there's a word for those. It's called kaleshas. And the Near English definition of that is afflictive emotions. And we all know what that feels like. When you're stuck in intense worry or fear or anxiety, fear is natural to being a human. So is anger. But they can become afflictive emotions when they come about through unskillful means. And so they result in what are called states of mental torment in the suttas, which is really pretty accurate from my experience. That's kind of what it is. It's mental torment. So, and that's what we call suffering. So this is the reactive mind that we talk about, unskillful. So for clarity, sometimes, and I put this in here because I sort of refer to it this way a lot, I think, which is when I talk about the unskillful thing we do, I usually call that reaction. And then when I talk about the flip side, the skillful thing we do, I a lot of times call that response. So reaction meaning just kind of happens. Response meaning there was a little volition behind it. So the next scenario. Let's see here. With sati. So with mindfulness and with those four kind of attributes of what real mindfulness is, real sati, you're aware of your experiences as they are happening. As a result, you're aware of the presence of either liking or disliking, and just like in the first, but you're aware of it. In the first, you're already in it before you really have any recognition of what's going on. You're already reacting to it. And so by then, whatever your reaction is to try, that's kind of that closing the gates to keep the wild beast out, not realizing the wild beast's already in there with you and you've just locked him in. So now you're lunch. But with sati, you're aware of your experiences as they are happening. And as a result, you're aware of the presence of either liking or disliking, which are natural. And you're also aware of the transition point between the liking or the disliking and what happens next. So being fully aware of that, you also understand that what happens next in terms of being unskillful or skillful, that response is volitional. It becomes something that you have some say in. So again, if something happens, you're not paying attention, somebody does something, you get angry, you snap, you're already in that reaction, you yell at them with anger, you feel bad, they feel bad, you kind of set this into motion, right? On the other hand, if you're aware something just happened and I feel myself getting angry, and as I'm getting angry, okay, I know I'm getting angry, and so in a weird way you kind of come upon this, so what's it going to be? I can either really holler at this person, because I've got a great response already thought up of what I can say. So I can either do that, or I can say, that hurt me deeply, or you could go off in another room and just do a little breathing and relax and come back in a minute when you feel a little more calm. But you realize you've kind of got, you come upon this, here I am, I'm at the point of reaction, and because I've seen it, I know I have a choice. And sometimes you come to that choice and you say, I think I'm going to just go with option A. I'm going to be mad, and I'm going to say my cool response that I have figured out, and I'm just going to fight with this person, right? And you do that, and it feels bad, you know? Then it's like, oh, what did I do? You know? I mean, you really don't win when you do that kind of stuff. You might win an argument or something, but, you know, you've lost because you feel bad. You've made them feel bad. You create all this negativity. You're in this unskillful thing. Now, again, you're still maybe angry, but you're at the point where you realize, now, I'm going to react. Choice A, blow up at him. Choice B, realize, yeah, I'm angry. But I want to do what is skillful here. I want to do what is helpful. I do not want to make this negative situation worse by just going with my reaction, my habit energy.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
At that point of being volitional,
Mm-hmm.
let's say you're not going to blow up at somebody, but can you then make the choice not to ruminate,
Yeah.
or not to carry more thoughts with it, or not to add more thoughts to it?
Yes.
Because that's my issue, is not that I go blow up at people, but
Mhm.
I get locked into this mindset of thinking,
Right.
of thoughts.
And a lot of
And
times,
it just becomes a big cycle.
yeah, and it's maintaining mindfulness and being aware of that. See, because that can be, you may not blow up at someone, but you may have some experience that causes you to go into that kind of that rumination phase. That's sort of your prevailing habit energy of the mind, is to start to go think of maybe worst case scenarios, or, you know, different kinds of things. But you're still aware, you know, you're still mindful of, okay, this is where I'm going with that. And so again, in that, all right, my reaction is I'm going into this rumination. Is that skillful or unskillful? Is that going to help me, or is that going to harm me in some way? And then it's like, yeah, choosing. It's volitional, and so you choose. In the old language, they used to talk about it in terms of that all this stuff has cause and effect, and that so whatever you do, it kind of sets into motion the next thing that's going to happen, and it reinforces the prevailing habit energy of the mind. Makes it stronger, so it's more likely to come back. It's that Sankara thing again. More likely to come back, it's more likely to be stronger, it's more likely to repeat. It's been reinforced. But as soon as you become aware, oh, yeah, my habit is to usually start to think about all the worst case scenarios here, then you can say, well, is there another option? Can I be objective? Can I think about what is really likely? Can I just be aware that I'm going automatically from point A to point Z in my mind, thinking of the worst case scenario? Can I think of potentially helpful things that I could do instead? Can I think of other options? Can I cultivate forgiveness? Can I cultivate kindness or generosity? You know, there's lots of different places you can go, but the habit energy of the mind is usually to just go right to that point of reaction. So responding with non-attachment, or non-greed, or non-anger, or non-ignorance is skillful. And I use those words intentionally. You know, like you could say, well, the opposite of greed is like generosity or giving or whatever. You know, sometimes it's just not possible, right? I mean, if you feel like you've really been beat up by somebody or screwed over, or that, you know, you just don't have it in you. I mean, that's a real thing. And so what's possible is, you know, maybe I can't just turn my frown upside down, but maybe I can, I can't believe I said that. Maybe I can't honestly do that. But maybe I can turn like my intense greed into just non-greed. There's sort of this, this halfway place where greed is not as intense. Or maybe I can turn my anger into, maybe I can't convert it magically into love, but I can turn my anger into something like non-anger, less intense anger. So it's starting with what you can do and not expecting yourself to, thank you for saying that horrible thing to me. I love you. This is, here's $20. You can't do it. So you're choosing to move to that place of equanimity, which we've talked about. Equanimity is skillful. That's skillful means. A skillful response means that it stops the cycle of negative reaction after negative reaction, and it creates more peace, freedom, and spaciousness. Now, I want to squeeze this in before I kind of open it up to questions or close it down for the evening, is to say that now, just because you observe your experiences with sati, this quality of mindful awareness and all those 4 helpful attributes, just because of that, it doesn't mean you just magically don't feel angry anymore, ever, or that you magically don't feel sad anymore. This isn't about making yourself no longer a human being. But what it does mean is that you do have them and you respond skillfully to them with the wisdom mind instead of the reactive mind. And difficult emotions do not become afflictive emotions, right? I mean, there can be that experience of, I'm angry because this really unfortunate thing happened. And that's a real thing, part of being human. But I can also be aware that my next move here, what's that going to be? And if I blow up, or if I get angry, or start blaming, or whatever it is, that's not going to help. I guess what I can do is take a few deep breaths, try and cultivate something like non-anger. I can see the reality of the situation rather than the afflictive emotional side of the situation. So, right, it's not about just, okay, I don't feel bad things anymore ever, but it's about when they come up, because I'm not in this complete overload mode with all these afflictive emotions and this kind of overreacting to everything, which sometimes we do, because you're in that. This is the habit energy of the mind at this particular time. Rather than going right into that, you're able to choose a different response, that skillful response. I know this is kind of a, there's a lot here. So this might be one of those, absorb it and think about it, but does it make sense to people?
Mm-hmm.